Every stone in this palace was paid for with hunger. Its foundation is £20,000 a year, squeezed from Irish farmers by an Anglican bishop. The man who built it never saw the construction. He was in Italy, buying up marble gods. And all the while, his agents were taking food from the people. Every 10th sheaf of grain, every 10th egg. Do you think this is just a story about old money? This is a curse that struck 200 years later, when the last heir squandered the entire fortune on heroin and died at 44. I will tell you how money that smelled of despair was turned into stone, and how that stone took revenge on its creators. But first, all this beauty, bought with the tears of an entire nation, was stolen by a single man, and his name is one you know well. It doesn't stand on the ground. It has landed. In the morning mist that clings to the ancient oaks of Suffolk, its curves seem like a mistake, a foreign body, too smooth, too round, too Roman for this damp English soil. The silence is broken only by the cry of a bird, slicing through the damp air. But listen closely. Another life breaks through the silence. The laughter of children running across the grass, the clinking of glasses from the hotel in the West Wing, an ordinariness that tries to tame this monolith. It doesn't know that this stone is not for living. It is for something else. Is it a palace, a temple, or a tombstone erected for a dream of colossal size? Its walls do not answer. They watch, with the cold, detached arrogance of a building that has seen the birth and death of its masters and knows it will outlive us too. To understand this paradox of brick and plaster, you need to hear a name that is still whispered in these corridors when the lights go out. Frederick Hervey, the 4th Earl of Bristol, the Bishop of Derry. 2 titles, 1 soul, torn apart. A man who wore the cassock of a priest and had the heart of a pagan emperor. His shadow lies on every inch of this estate. It is in the cracks on the facade. It is in the echo of footsteps under the dome of the giant rotunda. This house is his self-portrait, his ego cast in stone. He didn't build a family nest. He erected a personal pantheon in the marshy backwoods, a challenge to the heavens, thrown down by a man who considered himself an equal to the gods of antiquity. He wanted to bring Rome here, not its faith, but its pride, its marble, its art. Art was meant to be the blood in the veins of this stone body. But something went wrong. Today, tourists wander through the halls, admiring the symmetry and the light. They see the beauty, but they don't feel the foundation. They don't sense what this great weight stands upon. They don't know that this grandeur has a smell, the smell of old money, mahogany, and quiet despair. We stand at the foot of a mystery. How could an Anglican priest afford a fantasy worthy of Nero? Where did the money come from, capable of moving millions of bricks and thousands of tons of stone? And what price did he and hundreds of nameless others pay for this arrogant immortality? This is not the biography of a man. It is the confession of a building, the story of how a temple for one heretic was built on the tears of an entire nation. Before the first stone can be laid, there must be gold. And gold is not born from nothing. It is born from pressure. Let's travel from the English mists westward, across the sea, to a place where the air smells of damp earth and peat smoke. Ireland, the late 18th century. There is no room for neoclassical fantasies here. There is only the struggle for survival. A cold, piercing wind from the Atlantic brings rain that turns the earth into thick, black mud. This is where the story of our temple begins, not in an architect's blueprints, but in an accountant's ledger. Listen to the creak of a wooden plow, to the quiet cough in a damp hut with an earthen floor. This is the music that paid for future grandeur. Here, in the Diocese of Derry, Frederick Hervey was not just a bishop. He was a landlord, a collector, an invisible force whose shadow was longer and colder than that of any church. The system was simple and ruthless. Its name, the tithe. A tenth of everything the land produced. Every 10th sheaf of oats, every 10th potato, every 10th egg. A tax that the Catholic majority paid to a foreign Anglican church. They had no church of their own, but this one demanded payment for its existence. The tithe was a hungry ghost that sat down at the table of every Irish family. It takes the food from the mouths of children to fill coffers with gold in another country. £20,000 a year. Say it slowly. In those days, it was a fortune capable of financing a small war. But this is not just a number. It is a weight. It is the cumulative sum of thousands of small tragedies. Every pound is a failed harvest, a child's illness, a quiet prayer left unanswered. It is the choice between paying the church's due and buying seed for the next year. Hervey was not an evil genius. Worse, he was an effective product of the system. He didn't get his hands dirty in the Irish mud. He was in the warm salons of Italy, studying ancient statues, while his agents did their work. He even built roads and bridges on his Irish lands, not out of charity. Good roads speed up the collection of rent. It was an investment in the mechanism. Every brick that would be laid in the walls of Ickworth House was paid for here. Every strike of a stonemason's hammer in Suffolk was an echo of a quiet cry in Derry. The gleam of future chandeliers was meant to drown out the darkness in the huts from which the last copper coins had been squeezed. This is not a metaphor. It is economics, as direct as a gunshot. A harvest of sorrow, reaped on one island, became the foundation for a temple of egoism on another. Money that smelled of despair was laundered by distance and time, transforming into pure capital for the purchase of art. The original sin had been committed. The foundation had been laid. Not in English clay, but in Irish pain. Now, with pockets full of this dirty gold, he could go in search of beauty. He could begin to build his monument to greatness. The Irish mud had to be washed away. The best remedy, the Italian sun. Here, in Rome, in Naples, the air is different. It's thick. It smells of the dust of centuries, of cypress trees and hot stone. Here, under a sun that burns out the conscience, the bishop's cassock became a mere theatrical costume. Frederick Hervey shed it, as a snake sheds its skin. He is not a priest here. He is the Earl Bishop, an aesthete, a hedonist, an intellectual whose altar is the ruins of the Forum and whose Bible is a catalogue of ancient sculptures. He didn't buy art. He conquered it. Every marble Venus, every time-darkened canvas by Titian was a trophy, snatched from the clutches of the less enlightened, the less wealthy. He moved through salons and workshops with the predatory grace of a collector who knows exactly what he wants and can pay for it. The Irish money, depersonalized, cleansed by the salt water of the sea, was transformed here into something noble, into marble, into canvas, into eternity. Every marble torso was paid for by a season of hunger, every brushstroke on a painting by a dozen confiscated sheaves of grain. It was the alchemy of vanity. Mud was turned into gold, and gold into immortality. It was here, among the ghosts of Caesars, that the vision was born. Not a house. A house is for family, for comfort, for continuing a lineage. But he despised his kin. His wife wrote that he must either be adored or be shot. His son saw his father as nothing more than a walking bill to be paid. No, family is a set of shackles. He would build a statement, a challenge, cast in stone. that he would hurl in the face of the sleepy English aristocracy. He would tell them without words, "You are islanders, provincials with your boring brick boxes, but I am a citizen of the world. I am a Roman." He finds an architect, Mario Esprucci, a man who thinks as he does, not in rooms, but in volumes, not in comfort, but in grandeur. The silhouette of a monster appears on paper, a declaration of intent. At its center is not a living room, not a ballroom, a vast, arrogant, oval rotunda, his personal pantheon, where he would be the god, and his statues the saints, a space devoid of function. It is not meant to be lived in. It is meant to be entered, to be frozen in mute wonder. It is the physical embodiment of his ego. On either side, two wings, connected to the center by curved galleries, like arms that want to embrace the whole world, or to keep it at a distance. This is architectural heresy for England, a rejection of everything that came before. This is not a house that grows into the landscape. It is a spaceship that has landed upon it to declare its superiority. The blueprints were finished. Every line on the paper screamed of ambition, every arch of pride. The vision was perfect. All that remained was to send it 1,000 miles away, to the land of rain, and command people who had never seen the Roman sun to build one man's dream. The ego was ready to be given flesh of stone. Construction began, and immediately it turned into a war on two fronts, separated by 1,000 miles of mountains, seas, and misunderstanding. On the first front, in England, people fought. They fought the weather, that eternal Suffolk rain, which doesn't pour fiercely, but stubbornly, methodically, turning the earth into a quagmire and the brick into a wet sponge. They churned through mud, their hands coarsened by lime and cold. Their enemy was the blueprints, Italian fantasies sent from afar that had to be brought to life here, under a leaden sky. Every order was an abstraction. A letter, taking weeks to arrive, in which their master, sitting under the Naples sun, demanded the impossible. A curve in a wall that defied the laws of physics. A dome that local craftsmen didn't know how to build. They were constructing a building they didn't understand, for a man they had never seen. Their only fuel was money. Money flowing from Ireland. They were raising walls while the roof was already leaking. A giant, oval wound, open to all the winds, refused to heal. It was a battle against gravity, against dampness, against the very nature of the place. The house was resisting its own birth. And on the second front, in Italy, Frederick Hervey was fighting his own war. It was a war against reality. He didn't just live, he burned. He climbed Vesuvius as it spewed ash and lava, risking being buried alive, just to feel the earth tremble beneath his feet. He flirted with married ladies and courtesans, creating scandals that echoed through the salons of London. A bishop whose parish was not a flock, but a volcano, and the boudoirs of women. He waged war on the budget. The Irish money flowed like a river, but he spent it like a waterfall. A new statue, a rare manuscript, another painting. He bought art with the obsession of a man who fears silence. Each purchase was a way to drown out the inner voice that whispered, this was all madness. He bombarded his builders with letters, new ideas, changes to the plans. Yesterday he wanted one column, today another. Yesterday the facade was to be modest. Today it was to be adorned with bas-reliefs. He managed the construction like a capricious god, sending contradictory commandments from a distant Olympus. The house was being built not because of him, but in spite of him, in spite of the distance, in spite of common sense, in spite of his own chaotic genius. It was a battle of his colossal ambitions against millions of small, stubborn details, against uncooperative stone, the slowness of the post, human fatigue. The walls in England rose slowly, agonizingly, and in Italy, the mountain of debt grew quickly and easily. The war was reaching its climax, and it was unclear who would bury whom under its rubble. The man, the building, or the building. The man. The walls were erected. The stone shell of a dream stood frozen beneath the gray sky. A damp wind howls under the vaults of the rotunda, creating a booming, empty echo. There is no sound of footsteps here, no laughter, no music, only the ringing silence of incompletion, a giant stone womb, ready to receive its treasures. But there are no treasures, and there is no king. A palace without a king is just a pile of stone, a mausoleum awaiting its dead. This house, conceived as a monument to triumph, became a monument to discord. It did not unite the family. It shattered it completely. Flying from Italy are not only orders, but bills. Bills that horrify his son, the heir, the man who will have to live with this monster. To him, these walls were not art. They were a debtor's pit. He looks at the blueprints and sees not beauty, but numbers. Thousands of pounds thrown to the wind. He writes furious letters to his father, begging him to stop. He calls the house a giant monument to folly, a monstrous, inconvenient house. But the Earl Bishop does not hear. He is too far away. He is deafened by his own grandeur. To him, his son is merely a wallet, obligated to finance his immortality. The house becomes an apple of discord, a weapon in a quiet, cruel family war. It is the physical embodiment of the chasm between father and son. The father is building a temple to himself. The son sees only a burden that will crush him and his children. He sees a roof that will forever leak, walls that will be impossible to heat. He sees the ghost of bankruptcy haunting every empty window frame. Beauty was supposed to live within these walls. Instead, resentment took up residence. The golden cage was built, the largest, most expensive, most unusual golden cage in England. But the bird it was meant for, a priceless art collection, is still 1,000 miles away, and its master, intoxicated by the Italian sun, is in no hurry to return to his cold, empty paradise. And in this deafening silence, in this vacuum of anticipation, tension begins to build. The building waits. The family waits. The debts wait. History holds its breath before the final, crushing blow. The culmination of futility had been reached. All that was left was to wait for the catastrophe. History doesn't like to wait for family dramas to play themselves out. It has its own plans, its own heroes, and its own villains. The year is 1798. The world is cracking at the seams. The French Revolution has unleashed its demons, and now they march across Europe, led by a short artillery officer from Corsica. His name doesn't thunder across the continent yet, but his army is already here, in Italy, Napoleon's army, young, hungry, angry. It brings not only new ideas, but an old habit, as old as time itself, looting. Frederick Hervey observes this with the arrogance of a British aristocrat. He is an Englishman, a lord, a bishop. He is untouchable. These revolutionary upstarts wouldn't dare touch him. He continues to drink wine, buy statues, and write angry letters to his son, confident in his invisible armor. But to the French soldiers, he isn't the Earl Bishop. He is an enemy, a rich Englishman snooping around Italy, a spy. And that is exactly what he is declared. The arrest was prosaic and swift, no drama, just soldiers entering his house in Milan. Their boots smell of the road and gunpowder. Their eyes are cold. They don't see a great aesthete, they see prey. In that moment, everything collapses, not just his freedom, his entire world, built on the certainty of his own status, comes crashing down. He looks at the soldiers' coarse faces, and his eyes reflect the horror of a man who has suddenly realized that his rules no longer apply. That money and titles are just dust in the face of brute force. And then comes the blow from which he will never recover. His collection, his life's work, the soul of his future palace, everything for which he had emptied Irish villages and plunged into colossal debt. The French are not sentimental. They don't see art in these statues. They see valuable cargo, marble, bronze, gilded frames, things that can be sold, things that can pay a salary. We see them burst into his vaults. We hear the creak of crates, the gruff commands in French. They wrap ancient gods in dirty burlap. They carelessly pack paintings by Renaissance geniuses. Every nail hammered into a crate lid is a nail hammered into the coffin of his dream. This is not just confiscation. It is desecration. The desecration of an altar before the eyes of its high priest. He watches as the wagons, loaded with his gods, are driven away. His immortality, his soul. He hears the squeal of the wheels carrying away his reason for being. In that moment, the Earl Bishop Frederick Hervey understands that he has lost, not to his son, not to his creditors. He has lost to history. The Corsican had arrived and, without even knowing the English lord's name, with a single stroke of a pen, had turned his triumph to dust. Prison breaks a man, but worse than prison is the freedom that follows. Freedom in a world where everything you loved has been destroyed. He emerges from captivity a broken man, not physically, spiritually. The sparkle in his eyes is gone. The arrogant confidence has vanished. All that remains is an empty shell, consumed by a desperate, powerless rage. He begins his last, hopeless crusade. A crusade for his soul, which has been sold off at auction. He tries to buy back his collection. He writes letters. He humiliates himself. He offers money. But the world has changed. His statues are already in the Louvre, decorating his enemy's triumph. His paintings have been scattered among the new rich, those who rose on the tides of war. His treasures had become trophies, and trophies aren't sold. They are put on display. And then comes the second blow, the money. The lifeblood that had fed his dream had stopped flowing. The stream of gold from Ireland had run dry. Political storms, the fear of a French invasion. The old system began to fail. The treasury was empty. In England, in Suffolk, the sound of hammers falls silent. The builders disperse. The scaffolding begins to rot in the rain. The unfinished, leaking giant falls asleep. Its empty eye sockets gaze at the sky with silent reproach. It is an orphan, abandoned by its creator at the moment of its birth. The temple, looted. The treasury, empty. The agony lasts for several years. He wanders Italy, a ghost of his former self, a shadow searching for its lost treasures. He is still the Earl Bishop, but now the title sounds like a mockery. The year is 1803. The end. He does not die in his bed. He is not surrounded by family. Fate denies him even this small comfort. He dies on the road, on a verge, somewhere near Rome, like a common traveler, caught by the night. His body, soulless long before its death, simply ceases to function. The last thing he sees is not the vaults of his great palace, but a foreign, indifferent Italian sky. In England, his son, now the fifth Earl, receives the news, and with it, the keys to the monster, to the unfinished, cold, empty behemoth burdened with debts that could buy a small county. He inherits not a triumph, but a curse, not a home, but a giant, leaking monument to the vanity of a man who dared to challenge history and lost. We are here again, in the rotunda. But the echo has changed. Before, it was the resonant, empty sound of one man's footsteps, lost in his own grandeur. Now, it is a complex, living hum, a guide's whisper, the shuffle of hundreds of feet on the marble floor, a child's laughter, soaring up to the dome and melting into the sunlight that falls on the faces of tourists. The house survived, but at what cost? The creator's shadow proved to be long and vengeful. It fell upon generations of his family, as if demanding retribution for the original sin of pride. The Earl Bishop's eccentricity mutated in his descendants, transforming into tragedy. Money, born from sorrow, continued to bring sorrow. We move through the decades. We see the 7th Marquis of Bristol, a gambler, an arms dealer, convicted 3 times, a man who sold his heritage piece by piece to pay for his vices. We see his son, the 8th Marquis, the last in the direct male line. He inherited a fortune of £35 million and blew it all on drugs. He died at 44, leaving behind only emptiness and scandal. The gold, squeezed from the Irish land, turned into white powder and burned up the last heir. The circle was complete. The building drained the life force from them, demanding sacrifices in exchange for its existence. And then, in 1956, salvation came. Not a triumph, but a surrender that turned out to be a victory. The family, no longer able to bear this stone burden, handed the house over to the state. It was not an act of generosity. It was an act of deliverance, an exorcism. The house, an orphan, found new guardians, the National Trust, an organization that heals the wounds inflicted by time and human madness. And here it is, the ultimate irony. The Earl Bishop's dream, which suffered a crushing defeat in his own lifetime, paradoxically came true after his death. He lost the battle, but his ego in stone won the war. He wanted his rotunda to be full of people admiring art. And it is. He wanted his name to be associated with the greatest collection. And it is, albeit with the story of its loss. He wanted to build something eternal. And he built it. The building outlived its creator. It outlived his descendants. It digested their tragedies and absorbed their scandals, turning them into a part of its own legend. It shed the selfish design of one man and found a new meaning, becoming the heritage of many. The verdict is in. The temple no longer belongs to the heretic. It belongs to time. Ambition is mortal, but great madness is eternal. We began this story with a stone that seemed a mistake in the landscape, and we end it with a stone that has become the landscape itself, swallowing destinies. This is the story of how one man's ego, having outlived its creator, gained the soul he was never able to imbue it with. Does the grandeur of beauty redeem the sin of its origin? And to whom does the legacy ultimately belong? To the one who created it, or to time, which has given it new meaning? This is not just the story of a single building. It is a conversation about the price of ambition and the nature of immortality, and we want to hear your voice in this conversation. Share your thoughts below. If stories like this make you see the world differently, support us. Your subscription and your like allow us to continue this dialogue.